Breaking news now at 8. Angelino's on edge following widespread immigration raids across L.A. Protests take over the streets as police try to get the demonstrations under control.
Let's take a live look from above now. A standoff between law enforcement and protesters.
Those protests still going tonight. Good evening. You are watching LA Live News Tonight. I'm Christine Devine.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Laura Diaz in for Marla Tejas. We're continuing our team coverage on the Los Angeles ICE raids.
We go live to Fox 11's Ed Lascos in downtown LA. Ed?
And Christine, at this point, it's still very much a standoff between LAPD law enforcement and that large group of protesters, maybe about a couple hundred strong. They've moved in around the Metropolitan Detention Center, and this whole area is sealed off. Quick look before we go to some video. This is Los Angeles Street as it heads over toward the freeway block over to the right. But up there is the freeway. That's the overpass, and CHP has moved in, blocking all the on-ramps and off-ramps to the freeway because they're worried that that crowd of protesters could eventually move over to the freeway, as we've seen before, and they certainly don't want that to happen. As we're looking now live down from Skyfox, the wild scene. But the center of all of this activity is at Metropolitan Detention Center, right at Alameda, right along the freeway. That is where the protesters have gathered the last couple of hours, because that's where the dozens who were taken into custody, detained by that large series of raids by the ICE agents, the federal agents, those being detained, held there at that federal building. So the protesters have moved in, and it has been a wild scene as we go to some of the video. A wild scene that has been playing out the last couple of hours there. The protesters moving in using their spray painting, using graffiti all over that building, chanting, let them go, hell no, we won't go, and many other chants that you can imagine. We can't say here, but you can imagine. They're very colorful indeed. So the crowd is there, and at times there's been a lot of pushing and shoving matches, and at times police have even had to use some flashbangs and some pepper spray to move the crowd around. Some more video as the scene continues to play out, even as one of our news crews was in the thick of that earlier. Some tear gas, apparently, or some type of gas was used by law enforcement to try to disperse the crowd, and everybody came away with their eyes burning, and it was a very tense situation, and that tense situation continues. About an hour 10 minutes ago, actually, LAPD announcing with their loudspeakers, with their helicopter and on the ground, it's an unlawful assembly, telling this crowd, if you don't leave now, we're going to move in, we're going to start making some arrests. And we've been seeing, Joe and I, our photographer here along Los Angeles Street, in the last 20 minutes or so, a convoy, dozens and dozens of LAPD black and white units racing through here, lights and sirens, heading over to the corner right near Alameda and the freeway as they move in with their skirmish lines, getting ready to start making some arrests to push that crowd away. And of course, as we've been talking to some of the law enforcement here, they do not want a repeat of what happened about a week ago when you had that lawlessness and the crowd moving through downtown in the area and doing a lot of damage. As we take a live look now up top Skyfox. So there it is, a live look at that standoff. The protesters really dug in there around the Metropolitan Detention Center. LAPD surrounding the area. They declared it an unlawful assembly, and they slowly are moving in. They're trying to break up that crowd, ready to make arrests as they bring in some more law enforcement ladies. So as we watch this, still a very, very tense situation playing out here by the federal building.
Watching during the 6 o'clock hour, Christina reported that there were about 500 protesters when it was at the biggest crowd. Then it diminished down to fewer than 100 people. It looks like those are the stragglers that are still there right now. How substantial a stand is the LAPD making? Because they've been standing back all day, basically saying, look, this is being handled by the feds. We're only going to be called in for crowd control or if something goes awry.
That has been the position all along, as even Chief McDonald has come out saying, you know, we're not involved in immigration policy, but they are standing by now trying to break this up because they don't want this to get out of hand, we're being told. That's why even the CHP with their patrols have come in to try to keep the crowd, the protesters, the stragglers, as you say, and that's a good way of identifying them, from moving in on the freeway itself. We've seen it once they declared this an unlawful assembly. We saw dozens of the protesters walking away, walking down Los Angeles, getting away, and we'd say, where you go? And they say, well, you know, we don't want to get arrested, we're leaving here. So that's the feeling. So you have those, quote, stranglers who are still there, and as the CHP helicopter circles overhead, I don't think you can hear it, but they're directing the crowd down there saying, if you don't leave now, there will be arrest. And they're telling everybody now, leave now, get out of the area, or you are subject to arrest. That's a quote from what we're hearing from the LAPD chopper overhead. So they're trying to disperse this crowd and ready with more reinforcements coming in to start making arrests, but they want to do it peacefully, and certainly they're hoping that it does not get out of hand.
Well, as we're looking at this live shot from overhead Skyfox, sometimes you see events where there are way more protesters than officers. As you said, quite a show of force there by the LAPD, also protecting those roads as well. It's a Friday night. It's downtown LA. Oftentimes people go out to downtown LA. Ed, are you thinking this is an area to avoid at this hour?
I would definitely say it's an area to avoid. We were trying to come up. We were in Baldwin Park for the officers' vigil tonight, and we were trying to scramble to get down here, coming up the 10 and coming up the 101, and that was the very last place you wanted to be. CHP actually had it shut down north and southbound for a while because there was a fear that the protesters would move there. So you can imagine when they do that and they have the on-ramps, the off-ramps closed, everybody was caught in that gauntlet, if you will, along the 101 freeway through the heart of downtown if they were trying to come down here to the entertainment area, and they couldn't move. It was a standstill. So yes, definitely this side of LA, the downtown section, certainly the spot you want to avoid, especially the 101 freeway. If you're coming the way I was suggesting, trying to get into the city from that location, you take the 10 around the other side and avoid this, and you wind up over by the convention center, you know, over by the old Staples Arena. I still call it Staples in that sense, but that'll get you away from all this mayhem over here. Yeah,
certainly you can take surface streets and get to the same locations and avoid this. We know, of course, this is where all the government buildings are. You've got the federal building, you've got City Hall, you've got, you know, where the DA is. So this is where people tend to demonstrate. But today, this started, of course, with those ICE raids. And then as people were brought over to the federal courthouse there, people became very upset. And that's when we saw the protesters gathering. Now, the people that you've been able to speak to there, Ed, did they talk to you about what occurred earlier in the day, or do you get the sense that they just showed up after everything had happened at the beginning of the day?
You know, I don't know how to answer that, Laura. I'll be honest with you. We just showed up, so I haven't had a chance to get into the crowd or even get close to the crowd at this point. We've talked to some of the ones who were leaving to avoid arrest, and they were pretty much moving very quickly, saying we don't want to wind up in jail tonight. So that's about all I can tell you on that front.
Well, as we're watching this picture, Ed, it seems to be fairly calm, unless you're telling me something different as you're there on the ground. But looking at the actions of the officers, they are pretty much standing there in formation. They're in position there. Small crowd in front of them. So right now, nothing escalating at this hour. In fact, when Christina Gonzalez was there at the detention center, it was much more animated earlier this afternoon.
It seemed to be, looking at some of that video, watching it, yes, they were much more agitated, if you will, a couple of hours ago when all of this was breaking out. Of course, that's before LAPD moved in with its show of force and its skirmish line. And even at that point, even before the CHP moved in, shutting down access on and off to the freeway itself. So I think the crowd was more emboldened then, if we could say that. And I think now with the thought of possibly an arrest, you're going to have some who are probably going to fear the possibility of being taken into custody by LAPD tonight. But it's still a tense situation as we're about a block or so away from this. But still, you've got a lot of people going. You've got the helicopter circling overhead, LAPD bird in the air. And Laura, you were mentioning a lot of the areas down here, but another big concern is we're only a block or two, if you will, away from LAPD, the headquarters itself, over here on 1st Street. And that is where we've seen in the past a lot of these protesters, when the groups break up, they splinter up, and a large group winds up in front of LAPD over by City Hall. So they don't want that to happen. That's why they're trying to move them around and make sure they don't wind up making a run at the main headquarters itself.
And also, you mentioned a CHP there, so there's obviously a concern that they would enter onto the freeway, and that's when it gets extremely precarious because of motorists, obviously. So what are you seeing in terms of CHP? How many?
There are many, many units, Laura. They are blocked as we drove up here, stationed at all the on-ramps and off-ramps. You know, coming down on the 101, there are several from Spring Street, Alameda. You count them almost every block or two. You've got the ramps that come off into this area. And so they were shutting down everything in that area, both if you're going north and south on the freeway. So there were, you know, probably, if you count them, dozens of CHP units.
Ed, do you get a sense that as it's getting darker out, that the crowd is continuing to thin out? Or do you see it, crowds coming, escalating? We've seen things go late into the night at times, but this crowd seems very thin.
Well, that's a thought. You know, it's a Friday night. I don't want to say somewhat warm because it's a bit chilly out here, but it's still a Friday night. You have this type of activity. You're going to help me with that one, Christine, because you've got a better view on the crowd from Skyfox than I have from my location.
I mean, our aerial shot, it looks like a very thin crowd, not many people there. You know, we have covered protests where there were tons of people in the streets late at night. Right now, this could be just a small group willing to stay out on a Friday night after protesting earlier in the day. Could be new people, fresh energy. And also, we've talked also about people who are not part of the main cause necessarily, but come for their own cause, their own reason, their own, even the agitators, Ed, we've covered before.
Yeah, agitators, and I'm thinking about, if I can quote our former police chief, Bill Bratton, used to say the knuckleheads, the troublemakers, they always are the ones who show up later and are here for one reason only. So you got to wonder, yeah, it's still relatively early on this Friday night, and that's why LAPD's here. They don't want it to get out of hand, waiting, and you make a very good point, Christine, waiting for that second wave that, you know, history always repeats itself, and we always see it when we have these protests, and you have a lot of folks who come out and they protest peacefully, they get their message across, but as the night goes on, it grows longer. Usually that's when things kind of change.
Well, Ed Lascos, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. If something changes out there, we will certainly go right back to you.